As of June 30th, 2024, Nigeria was listed as the third largest debtor to the World Bank's International Development Association. Let's take a look at the journey to the negative third position and how India especially exited the list on the show tonight. Good evening and welcome to MarketSquare. My name is Oluwapelumi Awe, and as always, I'm glad to have you join me on the show tonight. In the latest list of top debtors made public, Nigeria's debt to the International Development Association had risen by 14.4% from $14.3 billion in fiscal year 2023 to $16.5 billion in the fiscal year 2024, which marks a significant increase in the country's borrowing from the institution. You have an image on the screen that tells you about the top 10 on that list. You have Bangladesh, you have Pakistan, you have Nigeria, you have India, you have Ethiopia, you have Kenya, you have Vietnam, you have Tanzania, you have Ghana, and you have Uganda. For Nigeria, the $2.2 billion increase in debt owed to the World Bank caused the movement from its previous position as the fourth largest borrower in year 2023. This development has reflected a substantial shift in Nigeria's fiscal landscape under the administration of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, and this period aligns with President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's administration, underscoring the growing reliance on international fiscal support amid domestic economic challenges. On this show, many times we have spoken about the many debts secured by Nigeria, the many loans secured by the Nigerian government from the World Bank and other organizations in the world. With my guest tonight on the show, we'll examine our journey to this position, the negative third position, like I've named it, and what other countries are doing to exit this list. My guest tonight is a business journalist. He is by name Adekunle Agbetiloye. Adekunle, welcome to the show tonight. So let's start with what is shocking for me, because if you see the list, please put up the list again of the top 10 debtors in the world as published on the 30th of June 2024. You have Bangladesh, you have Pakistan. But what is more important to me at this time is to find out that you have a lot of African country on this list. You have Ethiopia and Nigeria, an African country, Ethiopia, an African country, Kenya, an African country, Tanzania, an African country, Ghana, an African country, Uganda, an African country. Did this come to you as a surprise or was it expected?
I would say it's not surprising. While that figure is concerning, it's not surprising.
Whoa!
Because we know from time past, African countries heavily rely on multilateral institutions like maybe World Bank, IMF, AFDB, for instance, as well. And even sometimes countries, China, America, all of them, Africans are to an extent indebted to them. So they do that for financial support to probably fund critical projects, infrastructures, like maybe education, healthcare, and the likes. And one of the major reasons for this is because of the state of the economy. So whatever happens in the global space affects Africa heavily. So when we're talking about global inflation, I know there was one that happened, was it in 2021 or so, that it really affected the thriving tech ecosystem. In 2021 or 2022, thereabouts, that really affected the thriving ecosystem in Africa. And like that was the first time we had like a very huge dip in the amount of money that tech brought into the continent. And so we also have geopolitical tensions. We had COVID in 2020 that like really affected a lot of countries. Geopolitical tensions like Russia-Ukraine war. Yeah, so we know that there was a time because of that war, Africans were heavily impacted, maybe in terms of agricultural produce like wheat that we majorly get from those countries. So if the economy itself is suffering, the only way out for many governments is to seek loans from institutions like World Bank, as I've said earlier. And the concerning parts that I mentioned is that it is like becoming a trend. Yeah, it's like becoming a trend. So if a country is not indebted to multilateral institutions, they're
Hmm.
indebted to countries or sometimes even private organizations. So it's really concerning. It's really concerning.
Okay, now you said
Yes, and one of the
okay.
reasons why economy is not like in high performance is because we rely so much on global markets, the global economy, as I've explained earlier with um the Russian Ukraine war, and let's even take COVID as well. Let's take COVID for example. We remember that during that time there was this debate about health colonialism, that drugs were almost readily available in developed countries, but then in Africa it was lagging then, and of course resulted in low vaccination rates. So those kind of huge dependence, it's a problem for the continent. And
Okay.
still talking about that, I think I wrote an article last year about some countries that have actually defaulted on debt repayments. Countries
Okay.
like Ethiopia, Zambia, and Ghana. So a lot of countries, African countries, are in debt traps. So it even makes it difficult to maybe make any economic progress. Of course, whatever revenue they get, they have to like pump back into debt repayments.
Yeah, yeah, I connect to that because on this show some weeks ago, I had a session with Oluwapelumi Awe where we discussed about the debt trap diplomacy that some countries in the world are trying to make more African countries fall into. Now, you mentioned that while it is concerning, it's not surprising. Nigeria is on that list and we rank as number one in Africa. And for me, that's not a good thing as a Nigerian. On the list of international debtors, people owing the World Bank a lot of money. You see the list, you have Kenya next, you have Ethiopia, you have Kenya and all. I'm asking you now to share with me your idea with regards to if you think Nigeria being the third on that list and the number one in Africa is surprising. Is that surprising to you that Nigeria is number one on that list? Yes.
Okay, so Nigeria ranks number one in Africa and is now the third in the world on list of debtors to
Yes, yes.
IDA. It's not it's not a surprise also, and this is majorly because of what should I say the economic trajectory of uh, the supposed giant of Africa in recent years.
Hmm.
Yeah. So the economic trajectory, we've seen that it has, should I say, nosedived in recent years than ever before, because we are facing a lot of like economic challenges. There's some of them like should I say carryover from COVID. So we have things like graffiti divine inflation, we have dwindling oil revenues, food security, and a host of other problems that are actually putting pressure on our government finances. So the only way out for them is of course to like get more funds. And since this new administration came into power, we've seen like countless loans being gotten for the country. And so talking about World Bank's idea, just to like explain what that really is. Uh, the essence of those loans, that loan is to help countries, especially developing countries, reduce poverty, inequality, maybe achieve improvements in economic growth as well, maybe job creation for environment, climate adaptation, because of course we are seeing effects of climate change, especially on Africa is uh, like on the vulnerable part of climate change. Yes, and so the idea is also used for infrastructure development and all of those things. And let's even talk about infrastructure. Nigeria is still so far behind compared to other Western world, and Nigeria is just a microcosm. It's a general African problem. So because there's a pressure maybe in terms of infrastructure for education, healthcare, and the rest, there needs to be like a substantial investment into those sectors. And it's almost as if the only way for countries to do it, especially Nigeria, amidst dwindling revenue, is to get loans
From the
from
World Bank.
multinational.
All right. Now, in June 2024, the World Bank approved two loans. You mentioned that already. The request made by Nigeria to get loan from that. The first was a $1.5 billion loan that was approved by the World Bank to support Nigeria's economic reforms and stabilize its currency under the tag Nigeria Reforms for Economic Stabilization to Enable Transformation. It was tagged Reset at the time. And the second loan approved by the World Bank was a $750 million loan to help Nigeria increase its non-oil revenue generation under the tag Nigeria Acceleration and Resource Mobilization Reforms Program for results. Now, is it too early to begin to assess the impact of the loan collected given how things are at the moment? You mentioned rightly that the loan gotten from the World Bank in most cases is supposed to be able to ensure that there is a lot of improvement in standard of living of the people. The infrastructure is better developed and improved. Can we begin to say that the loans gotten from the World Bank has impacted our economy in any way, or is it too early to assess the impact of the loan gotten from the World Bank?
Okay, yeah, so for this, I to an extent believe it's too early to assess the, should I say, impact or let's say long term impact of these loans. And this is not to say or belong to that school of thought that says we should be patient with the present administration. No, no, no. I'm just talking about the loans here. So for the loan for the reset program, the loan I believe is to stabilize Nigeria's economy, which is presently facing gravity defying inflation rate, and then the currency depreciation, first subsidy impact. Yeah, all of those things have felt like inflation rates in recent times. So for the second loan as well, 750 million naira loan to increase like non-oil revenue, and then increase our revenue mobilization system. So all of these things like take time. They're usually not immediate. Like you said, I think that's 2024. Yeah, so they're really not immediate, but then uh there should be early indicators for this, like early signs of uh positive potential. Yeah, there should be early signs for it. And one of the problems with people taking time to maybe be patient about what the impact of these loans will be is that there's a trust deficit between the government and the citizen. So previous administration or even the present administration have like shown people that financial austerity should just be limited to uh, the citizens. So you see the politicians, the government gets loans, and then maybe soon afterwards, you hear the pumped money into, should I say, this sector, and then just like a few set of people just cash out, take that money, should I say, siphon it, yeah, and then it doesn't really get to the grassroots. So when people can see immediate, when they can't see impact of, don't let me even put a time span to it now. When they can't see impact of loans like that, there's usually like a trust deficit whenever government talks about loan. So let's take first subsidy for instance now. I think Nigeria got like some loans to, should I say, alleviate the impact of first subsidy when it was first initiated, and then um, many Nigerians, I can say, did not feel the impact of whatever scheme the government put in place to alleviate those pains. In fact, it's as if that's like gone worse. And where the problem is from is after should I say disbursing those funds, because of the corrupt nature of our system, a lot of people will just want to maybe uh gain from that scheme at that period of time. And so if every politician at every stage, let's say after it was disbursed, Mr. takes his own, uh, maybe the governor takes his own, maybe local government chairman, honorables, and the like. Just like a trickle down effect from that national level to local government level. What will be left to even implement at the grassroots level for masses will almost be non-existent, because every political hierarchy have decided to take a part of a huge chunk of that national cake. So if people can't feel the impact, they feel there's a problem somewhere. And so that's where the trust deficit stems from. So it's as if they've been conditioned to be impatient to like even see or hope that there will be an impact from loans like this.
Okay, now there were some areas mentioned at the point of loan collection from the World Bank, and I'm talking about areas that can stimulate economic activities and can also improve our infrastructure, our education, our health, and our agriculture. And you already mentioned that it seems too early to begin to assess the impact of the loan. But let me just ask you already now, how well has this loan collected impacted the Nigerian economy? You mentioned that there should be indicators. We should know that something has come into a country. We have more money to do more than we can do before. So how well has this loan collected impacted the Nigerian economy? So far, so good. Yes.
Okay, yes. So how has these loans impacted the Nigerian economy?
Sure.
Um, so like I explained earlier that some of them are long term, and because they are to like address deep rooted structural challenges of the economy, their impact may not be immediate. It may not be immediate. So for sectors like loans impact in sectors like maybe infrastructure, education, health, and agriculture may take some time to materialize. Okay, I think I need to put a disparity there now. So the only maybe short-term impact we may be seeing maybe in sectors of things like agriculture. So we know agricultural produce and all of those things are like seasonal, and so we can see like the impact almost immediately. So all of these things can have a direct impact on maybe food imports that were actually very well known for. One of those things affecting our economy, of course, is our large dependence on imported goods. Yeah, imported goods. And then there's also like the supply chain issues, like in terms of agriculture now. And then there's also the issue of insecurity. So we are surprised that uh, food inflation is at a record high. But then have you also thought about insecurity in northern states where we have a lot of agricultural activities going on? So if farmers do not feel safe to go to should I say farm, how are they supposed to produce? So those kind of loans can their impact can be felt maybe almost immediately in areas like should I say agriculture. But for things like education, uh healthcare, it requires like a long-term investment to yield like measurable improvement, because this sector, education and healthcare that we're talking about, is should I say laden with lots of problems. I attended one of the six universities President Jonathan, ex-president Jonathan created and established. And yeah, so while I got into the school, when I got into the school, at least there were still like um we did not have like 100% best infrastructure like maybe private institutions, but then what we had then was able to serve the number of students that were there. But almost at the time I was about to leave the school, there were like more numbers of people, students coming in. And at that point, there was already a gap between the infrastructure the school had and then the number of students coming in. So it's you would see students sometimes sit on the window side to get lectures, and then there's just a whole lot of problem around that area. So for things like that to really like have that tangible effect of on education, of course they can build those buildings and all of those things, but then to have, because real education has to tell on the citizens themselves. It has to tell on the citizens. It's not strictly about buildings and all of those. It has to tell on the citizens. So that may require like a longer should I say period of time before it begins to manifest, like I mean the impact now.
Okay. Now, as I turn to the two, India was number one on that list. And as we speak at the moment, India can be found on the top 10 list. And in the 1990s, the Indian government initiated liberalization policies, and the reforms included privatization, deregulation, globalization. Also, they made effort towards boosting the economic activities and then desire to attract foreign investment into the country. And at the moment, like I said already, India isn't on that list, looking at the top 10 made public by the World Bank, and Nigeria at the moment stands as number 3. What lessons can we learn from India's exit from the list of debtors to the World Bank? What can we do? What of the things I've said already? Globalization boosted their economic activities. They also engaged privatization, regulation. What lesson can Nigeria learn from the approach taken by India to exit the list of debtors to the World Bank?
All right, yes. So for India's case, it's almost as if there's always a country Nigeria can learn from, but then we never truly learn from these countries. So for India now, I think one of those things they like put in place is trying to diversify their economy. And I talked about economic diversification the other time. For Nigeria, I think there was a major focus on agriculture at a point. Now, IT, tech is also like getting into that space. Why we are still largely behind with those things, at least it's better than what we used to have, I would say. We are still an oil dependent country. So whatever happens to the oil markets, the global oil markets, we definitely affect our economy. I think oil brings about maybe 80 to 90% revenue for the country. And there was a time when agriculture was like the mainstay, but then the sudden heat of our oil reserves made interest in our agriculture dwindle, and that's one of the reasons why we're actually in the mess we are right now. So for India, I think they expanded into things like IT, manufacturing, services. For Nigeria, it's not that same way. And so just wanted to like link this to the African continent generally. I know we are like very, should I say, rich with natural resources, and some of those natural resources are what the Western world like comes to Africa for. So we have things like lithium that is used for electric vehicles. And one of the major problems, we have cobalt in Congo as well. One of the major problems with this is that though we have those resources, but then we export them as raw materials, not as finished products. So if it were to be like we export them as maybe not even finished product, let me say semi-finished product, it would have been better because it would have probably created, should I say, a labor chain on the continent. Maybe things like some people will be employed and all of those things. But then from that raw material state, we just export it to those countries. So they make good use of those raw exports and then import whatever products they make with it. Maybe things like electric vehicles, things like maybe electronics, they maybe things like gadgets, they import it back to the continent at an increased price. Let's take Nigeria for example. Before maybe refinery, Dangote refinery came to maybe start its operation. Nigeria is oil rich, it's an oil rich state, but then when we get the crude, we export it to go and refine in other countries. Then we import it back. It's just simple. That is illogical. It makes no economical sense. But then that's the reality. That's the reality. So for natural resources where we can, should I say, gain from, maybe in terms of trying to do some manufacturing around it ourselves. We export all of those economic goods, we export them out, and then are left with nothing. Then we just hope those people bring back like products with it, and then we have to pay so much for it. We have to pay so much for it. And so also I think private sector development, so some of those, it's one of those things India, should I say, put in place. And really, a country cannot grow on its own if it does not, shall I say, partner with private organizations. So,
Definitely,
take for instance
definitely.
now, the only functioning refinery in the country is owned by Africa's richest man. That is a private sector development, I would say. Yeah, and its impact even cuts beyond Nigeria. It extends to other African countries. So
Definitely.
we cannot downplay the essence of, should I say, boosting that private sector. We can't. We see that a lot of multinationals have left the country. Oil multinationals, a lot. Not even just oil. A lot of manufacturers have left the country, maybe due to the high cost of operations. And so it's a bad should I say omen for the country. Yeah, for economic growth, it's actually very bad. And then lastly, governance and accountability. Yeah, so I understand that no country is immaculate. Yeah, the corruption is, should I say, ingrained in uh the human blood to an extent. But then for Nigeria, one of the problems is that there is no consequence. So for those Western
Mm,
countries, for uh other developed countries, there are usually consequences for actions. But in this country, there is no accountability and nobody bothers to explain things to the masses. And if you remember what I talked about for trust deficits, when you do not tell people the truth, when you do not open your books to tell them, oh, this is where we are at. So just random thoughts about what could be begins to play in the minds of people. So I'll take our first subsidy for instance now. After the removal in May, when Tinubu removed it in President Tinubu removed it in May, I said subsidy has been removed, and people like, yeah, it was tough for them, but at least they were already living the moment. And I can't remember the amount Nigeria gained within, should I say, but I know it was in billions. It was in billions. And then sometime, I think late last year, we got to know, and it's actually simple for those people who like follow economic trends. We got to know that first subsidy was secretly paid. So one thing about oil is when there is fluctuation in the global market, it should reflect on the pump prices in Nigeria. But then as it was just static. So when dollar was increasing and when there were global fluctuation like in prices, the fuel price in Nigeria was static. So that tells us that there's a form of subsidy. And then
true.
the government kept denying till uh, a small admittance, was it last month or 2 months ago? In fact, they said it's not called fuel subsidy. They termed it something I can't remember now. But then it's almost as if they are saying we are not paying fuel subsidy, and when really that's the reality. So
Okay.
when you're not open to
Okay.
your citizen, you make them think about a lot of things.
Thank you very much. Mr. Adekunle Agbetiloye, thank you so much for coming on the show tonight. We do appreciate your presence, and we hope that the next time we call for you to come, you would come and share your thoughts as well. Now, I did even say this before. Mr. Adekunle Agbetiloye is a senior journalist, a senior reporter at Business Insider Africa. Thank you for coming on the show. And thank you for watching tonight's episode of MarketSquare. Do want to follow us across all our social media platforms on Facebook, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on TikTok to get updates every time we post episodes of all of our products. My name is Oluwapelumi Awe. See you on the next one.